Welcome into the Waiver Fantasy Football Podcast. It is NFL Week 6. We are on episode 38 of the show. This is an audio-only edition of the show because, unfortunately, we're still without our co-host for today. So instead of having you all just watch me talk to my phone or talk to my computer, we're doing audio only. So, as usual, I'm your monotone master. We are without Brian, the fantasy foreseer. And unfortunately, the Raging Rumney has rage quit from the podcast. He is unfortunately too busy trying to do work life and balance out his regular not work life. So he has unfortunately resigned at the moment. We wish him the best and would welcome him back if he gets the energy to join our show again. But you can find our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you can also watch the show on YouTube when we have more than one host talking. But you can also find us on social media at While You're Wrong Fantasy Football, on TikTok and Instagram as While You're Wrong FFB, separated by underscores, and on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. But just reacting some of Week 5's headlines, it really just doesn't matter how much you prepare. Sometimes fantasy reminds us all that anything can happen, like a defense forcing a running back to score so they could get the ball back. And are the Ravens a pass first team and pass second team now? They completely abandoned their run-first game, and Hollywood Brown, Mark Andrews, and Lamar Jackson went nuclear for fantasy teams who are praying for Monday Night Miracles. And then Tom Brady quietly threw for 5 touchdowns this week, providing great fantasy days for all of his options. So I feel like the speculation is you just have to play your Tampa Bay wide receivers if they have good matchups. There's I think it's a 3 out of 4 rules between Gronk, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown. 3 of them will have good games. 1 of them will have a bad game just because they all can't score a touchdown every single week. Getting to our Devil's Advocate team. This week, with Jimmy Garoppolo going down, since Derek Carr has done me dirty, we put him as our quarterback for the Devil's Advocate team. Followed up by receivers of Mike Evans and Jamar Chase are still there, both trying to prove to us how wrong we were this offseason. Jonathan Taylor also trying to show Brian that he is here for business. Then we also have Saquon Barkley, Dallas Goedert, and Kenny Golladay in our flex. We all know that Kenny Golladay and Saquon Barkley went down due to injuries, so the Devil's Advocate team came out to 94.5 for points this week. Both myself and Brian beat the Devil's Advocate team, myself scoring 111, and Brian's team went nuclear for 144. Some impactful news. It's all injury related. Much to the heartbreaking news of being a Seahawks fan, Russell Wilson is going to be out at least 4 weeks with a finger injury. He practically just tore the muscle in his middle finger on his throwing hand when his hand collided with Aaron Donald on a deep bomb for Tyler Lockett, which unfortunately for many of us out there didn't connect for a 67-yard touchdown. So he's projected to miss 4 to 5 weeks. 4 weeks is super optimistic, but we'll see where the news goes. Unfortunately for a lot of us out there, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be out a few weeks with an MCL sprain. He was recently placed on the IR, and the team has been looking into trading for Marlon Mack. But for the moment, Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon will be splitting carries. The bad news is for Clyde owners, this is starting to work like a timeshare backfield, and now that Clyde will be missing time, even if he does come back, he's not going to be seeing the vast majority of the snaps that we were all hoping for this season. It's just another year of what could have been if Clyde got the ball more in the best offense in football. Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be out for the year with a shoulder injury that he suffered, which just means Big Ben will most likely be hyper-targeting Deontay Johnson a little bit more, hopefully making up for the 2-target, 2-catch week that we just had. Chase Claypool will probably get more involved. We'll see if James Washington can step up to the plate. And also means Najee Harris will probably also get a few more receptions, just most likely evenly dividing out Juju's workload for the rest of the year. Trey Lance got his first start, but he apparently had a knee sprain in the middle of the game, and he could be out for 1 to 2 weeks. Now they are going into their bye. Jimmy Garoppolo is also dealing with an injury. Both quarterbacks currently injured. They could most likely go back to Jimmy Garoppolo when they're both healthy after the bye week, but fingers crossed that maybe Trey Lance gets to start with his running ability. I think for fantasy, we all want to see Trey Lance, But when it comes to NFL football, the 49ers could most likely go back to Jimmy Garoppolo for week 8. Kenny Golladay is out with a hyperextended knee. He's expected to at least miss this coming week versus the Rams. Daniel Jones exited the game in the second quarter with a really nasty concussion. He's still in concussion protocol. If he's out this week, that means the Giants will be relying on Mike Glennon versus the Rams. So even though the Rams have not been the super elite defense that we usually know them as, even if they're middle of the pack defense, I'm not super optimistic about how the Giants will do with Mike Glennon at quarterback, because they're right now missing all 3 of their starting wide receivers. Saquon Barkley went out. He's going to be out for 2 to 4 weeks with a little ankle sprain. So you're looking at Mike Glennon behind Derek Booker, combined with Kadarius Toney being the only viable options for the next week or so. Even though Kadarius Toney went off in relief for being the only athletic player left on the field, it'll be interesting to see how the Giants fare against the Rams and then the Panthers. 2 tough defenses for what their offense currently is right now. So you got to just hold your breath if you're going for Devontae Booker and you're a waiver wire ad this week. You just have to hope that he gets enough attempts and enough touches to just be a solid RB2 for your fantasy team while Saquon Barkley is currently out dealing with his injury. Some flex pickups, or just like your wide receiver and running back waiver wire ads for week 6. Now, one thing to note is this is going to be the beginning of bye week. So there are 4 teams currently out on bye. That is the Saints, the Jets, and a handful of other teams off the top of my head. But you really have to worry about week 7 when every single fantasy superstar is going to be out on bye. That's the Vikings, the Cowboys, the Bills, the Chargers, the Jaguars, and I think a handful of other teams as well. So you not only want to be picking up guys for this week, you want to also be picking up guys for the following week as well. So check your week 7 schedule and see how many of your players are actually out on bye, and then try to prepare this week before the guys you'd want the following week get picked up. So right now the top ad is looking at as Kadarius Toney versus the Rams, our wide receiver. He's the only option left in the room. The first round draft pick showed last week why he's a first round draft pick. He's most likely going to be at the top of your board. But when it comes to the fab, it really just comes down to how wide receiver needy your team is. I feel like since how many wide receivers there are out there, you're most likely going for your flex play if you're going for Kadarius Toney. So depending on how much fab you have, I could see myself spending between $10 to $15 on if I really need a spot start this week or the following week. Just because once the other Giants options come back, it'll be interesting to see how the workload is divided amongst all of them. Another option you could go for is Amon-Ra St. Brown on the Lions. He saw 8 targets for 6 catches. He's playing against the Bengals, which have been a suspect defense, as we saw them get ran over by the Jaguars a few weeks ago. So you're picking up him because you believe in the safe target share. He's not going to be a big time down the field 50-yard touchdown guy. He's probably going to be a closer to the line of scrimmage mid-ranged guy who's going to be probably catching a lot of targets if the defense is singling out TJ Hawkinson. So if you want a 1-week safe play, he could be the guy if you're looking for wide receiver help. But if you really want a giant potential boom-bust game, you could be looking at the Cardinals wide receivers. Christian Kirk and Rondell Moore might be out there on the waivers. We just saw the Chargers and Browns go into a firefight. We could easily see the Cardinals and the Browns go into a firefight. So this could be a big game for one of the wide receiver options for the Cardinals, or maybe 2 of them. Because if you're putting up 40 points, more people have to score than just one player. When it comes to running back, Devontae Booker will most likely be at the top, mainly because he's going to be seeing the majority of the carries with Saquon Barkley being out for the next 2 to 4 weeks. Doesn't have the best matchups coming up with the Rams and Panthers, but if Saquon Barkley if his injury is more severe than it is, and he's out for multiple weeks, I'm saying like he's out for 3 to 4 weeks, then it's definitely worth spending between 10 to 20 fab on Devontae Booker as a running back too. If you're desperate for running backs, because we got bye weeks coming up, we don't know what's going to be happening. He's definitely a guy worth picking up if you're in a bind. Then replacing Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be a 2-headed monster between Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon. Now they're playing the football team whose last year's defense would have been very intimidating, but this year this defense for some reason has not shown up. Darrell Williams will get the bulk of the first and second down carries. Jerick McKinnon will also get a significant amount of third down carries and maybe a few series. You're really just going for the option on a high-powered offense, going to one of these two guys. And then if it's really thin out there, you'll be looking at Brandon Bolden versus the Cowboys. The Patriots defense has taken a hit. The Cowboys will have to put up points, even though this does feel like a trap game. Every single game with the Patriots feels like a trap game for opposing offenses, just because of the way Bill Belichick schemes his defenses. But if the Cowboys put up points, the Patriots will have to throw the ball. And with how unlucky the Patriots running backs have been with fumbling, Brandon Bolden is the most trustworthy guy in the eyes of Bill Belichick. So the majority of the receiving work will be going to Bolden. So if you want someone that's going to get you a handful of catches in a full PPR league, Brandon Bolden could be a good flex play or running back 2 if you're desperate this week. One thing to note, the Khalil Herbert of the Bears had 18 touches for 75 yards. Now, it's 1 week. We saw him basically take over the positive game script for the Bears when they're up on the Raiders. When it was neutral script or negative game script, Damian Williams was holding the ball. There's a lot of Darrells and Damians and Williams out here in this league. Sorry for all the name mix-ups. But Damian Williams finished with 12 points for fantasy. That's a pretty solid game. I think you should really just lean on Damian going forward, but Herbert could be a stash at this point. He's definitely worth being picked up if you have room on your roster. If something more would happen, if the man's getting 18 touches, he could see more work. But it's kind of hard to really just burn fab on him because we don't really know if this is going to be a split backfield or if it's really just he's in the game because it's the positive game script and they're just trying to run out the clock. We're talking about more streaming options. We're talking about quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses going into this week. Now, I'm trying to pick guys that are rostered in 50% of leagues or less. So for quarterback, I want to go with Taylor Heineke versus the Chiefs. Now, he did not have a great game last week, but they're playing against the Chiefs. They're going to have to score points to stay competitively. The Washington defense has been suspect, so the Chiefs offense could score a lot of points, which means Taylor Heineke is going to have to score a lot of points to keep this game competitive. So even though this could be a game where the football team loses, Heineke could be forced to hyper-target Terry McLaurin and the other receiving options just to give them a chance. So it could be a bad game on paper for Heineke, but he could have a decent fantasy day. Other two quarterbacks you could be looking at is Teddy Bridgewater versus the Raiders. The Raiders do not have a very intimidating defense at all. So Teddy Bridgewater has shown that he's going to give the ball to the best receiving options. So it really just comes down to the week, it feels like, between Courtland Sutton and Noah Fant. One of them's going to have a great game. One of them's going to have a disappointing game. But Courtland Sutton has been fire for 2 out of the past few weeks. Unfortunately, I have played him when he's only getting 6 points, and he's been on my bench for his 20-point games. But he is definitely a worthy wide receiver 2 or flex play this coming week. Also, Baker Mayfield versus the Cardinals. Just going off of what happened last week, Baker Mayfield may not get you a 30 or 40-point game like Herbert could. But with the way the Browns are going to have to play versus the Cardinals, they will be running the ball with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. But if that's a screen pass, if it's a short 3-yard swing pass, that could be an easy touchdown for Baker Mayfield. Just if they're trying to lean on the receiving game, trying to play catch up with the Cardinals, but the ball might still be going to the running back. So Baker Mayfield could get some short touchdown throws or be the beneficiary of throwing a short pass and having someone break off for a touchdown. When it comes to tight ends, Dan Arnold on the Jaguars is still getting a decent amount of targets and then going up against a bad Miami defense. You could pick up Dan Arnold. You might not get a touchdown. You might not get a ton of yards, but if you just want a trustworthy handful of targets and maybe 30 to 50 yards for your tight end, maybe a touchdown on top of that, Dan Arnold could be a solid stream this coming week. Also, Dallas Goedert has just been put on the COVID list. They play Thursday. So if Zach Ertz is out there and you're really desperate at tight end, he could be a play. The Tampa Bay defense has been very stout against the run, but they are not as great against the pass with all the injuries they've had at cornerback. So this could be a decent day for Devonta Smith. It could be a good day for Zach Ertz. it's going to have to be a shootout for the Philadelphia Eagles to have a chance of winning this game. And Jared Cook hasn't had the best season so far. It seems that he's more valuable in the games where Mike Williams isn't. Versus the Ravens, who've had a suspect defense so far through the past few weeks, with the Colts just scoring 25 points on them. If you're desperate, Jared Cook could be also another streamer at tight end that could get you a handful of catches and a sneaky touchdown if the defense is focused on the bigger Chargers options. And speaking of defense, it's very rough out there for defenses right now. You could do the Jaguars or the Dolphins versus the Jaguars or the Dolphins. If Tua comes back to the lineup, you probably don't really want to pick the Jaguars, but if it's still just Jacoby Brissett, who was limping around the past game after getting injured, the Jaguars could be a very sneaky and dirty play at defense this week. But if the Broncos are out there, they're playing the Raiders. The Raiders have had put up 2 just absolutely garbage games the past 2 weeks. So the strong Broncos defense could give the Raiders offense and Derek Carr a very hard time. And then if you don't believe in Justin Fields, the Packers defense could be a play this week. Jaire Alexander will most likely shut down. They're already shut down Allen Robinson. But if you don't believe in Justin Fields, you believe in the Packers, you could be in for a decent middle-of-the-pack defensive play with Green Bay. But the only fear is that you get these garbage time touchdowns. So you could be looking at an 8-point game with a low-scoring NFL game, and then all it takes is 1 touchdown for you to lose half of those points. But if they're out there, they're definitely worth a pickup if you are streaming defenses and there's nothing else for you to pick up in a better matchup. There were a lot of studs for week 5. At quarterback, our top 3 were Josh Allen with 36.5, Tom Brady with 37.7, and Justin Herbert lighting it up for 42.8. And just because I made this slide before the Monday night game finished, Lamar Jackson also had a 41-point game, which basically all came in one half, which is just so mind-boggling that that's possible. At running back, Myles Gaskin had 25 rushing yards, but went for 10 for 74 and 2 touchdowns through the air, giving him a 26.9 point a week. Austin Eckler, 66 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, also went for 5 for 53 and 1 through the air with 30.4 points. And Jonathan Taylor had that long breakaway run at the beginning of the game, which gave him a nice starting point, and then ended up finishing the night with another 30 burger for all those who had no faith in Jonathan Taylor. Their hearts were crushed as he went for a 30-point game against the Baltimore Ravens. And then Derrick Henry continues to do Derrick Henry things by rushing for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. Could Ryan Tannehill get a rushing touchdown? Or maybe you could throw the ball to A.J. Brown for a touchdown, just maybe even it out there. Titans, but moving on to wide receiver. Antonio Brown, the third in line for the Buccaneers wide receivers, 7 for 124 and 2, finished with 27.9 points. Devontae Adams had a game, 11 catches, 206 yards and a touchdown for 32.1. Then Mike Williams had another dominating game with 8 catches, 165 yards and 2 touchdowns for 32.5. And then if you had faith in Kyle Pitts, you stuck out with him until week 5. He finally rewarded you. With the Falcons not having their top 2 receiving options at wide receiver, Kyle Pitts gave you 9 catches, 119 yards, and a touchdown for 22.4 points. David Njoku had that long breakaway touchdown versus the Chargers. I'm sure that you all expected this from David Njoku, putting up a 7 for 149 and 1, giving you 24.4 points. And then Mark Andrews saving the day of so many fantasy managers that are down and out, saving the Ravens, basically going in the second half 11 for 147 and 2, including 2 2-point conversions, finishing with 36.2 points, just ending so many dreams of having good weeks for fantasy managers that were playing against them. At kicker, Mason Crosby got 16. Greg Joseph for the Vikings got 17. And then the Folk legend, Nick Folk, got 17 points, saving the Patriots from losing to the Texans. At defense, Buffalo, if you had the cojones to play them versus the Chiefs, finished with 17 points. Tennessee had a nice 13 points versus Jacksonville. And the Philadelphia Eagles, although playing an ugly game, still managed to have a 12-point finish for their defense and special teams. Some duds. Surprisingly, a lot of these studs were on my fantasy team, which is why I barely cracked 90 points in one of my leagues this year. But AJ Brown, 5.6. Terry McLaurin, 6.6. Latavius Murray, 4. Kyler Murray, 13.6. Chase Edmonds, 2.9. Noah Fant, 3.5. Darren Waller, 6.5. Brandon Cooks, 3.8. Adam Thielen, 5. Cole Beasley at 1. And DJ Moore at 6.3. Now, these are all guys that had bad weeks. I know Latavius Murray is not going to light up the scoreboard. He's had a high of 59 rushing yards this season. He's really not a focal point of the Ravens offense. His day could have been saved, but Lamar Jackson decided to try to rush in a touchdown himself and fumbled. If he gave it to Latavius Murray, he would have scored, and Murray would have had a solid RB2 day at a nice 10 points. What I'm really just concerned about right now is AJ Brown, because I have him in one of my leagues, and since week 1, he's been just extremely disappointing. Hasn't gotten above you 10 points since week 1, and you really just can't do much with him. You can't drop him because of his talent, and you know what he can do. He has been dealing with injuries, but because he's been so disappointing, you can't even really trade him for anything right now. So you really just have to hold on to him and hope for better days with AJ Brown. You really need a resurgence of an offensive passing game from the Titans for this to happen. Now, the Bills are a very intimidating defense. Best case scenario for AJ Brown this week is that the Titans focus on Derrick Henry and force the Titans to throw the ball. The Bills focus on Derrick Henry. And with Julio Jones still being sidelined by an injury, this means AJ Brown should be hyper-targeted. Hopefully he starts catching the ball because he's had some horrific drops this year. You really just have to hope in the talent of AJ Brown going forward into the season, unless you want to trade him for another option if you need an RB2, or if someone offers you a deal because they are huge Titans fans, then you could just try to figure out a way to move AJ Brown. But with being shorthanded today for the podcast, I'm not going to go through all the matchups with you as we normally like to, just because it'd be such a much longer episode. We'll get back to matchups next week. It's one of the more fun parts of the podcast, but on short notice, it's hard for just one host to get through all of them going forward. So we really just wanted to focus on injury news and waiver pickups for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. If you have any questions or comments or start-sit decisions or any fantasy-relevant questions you want to ask, me and Brian would love to answer them for you. Leave them on YouTube in the comment section. You can message us on Instagram, leave them in the comment section on Instagram, but we'd love to make it more interactive, so please leave us your questions and would love to answer them going forward. But as always, have a great week, guys. And just remember, if you started off poorly, if you're 2-3, if you're 1-4, if you're 0-5, there's still another 8-9 weeks left of the regular fantasy season schedule. And we're getting into bye weeks, so you might be surprised, but your team could slowly start to turn it around. There's still another half of fantasy football to get in. You might only be 2 or 4 or even 3 games out of playoffs because it's all about getting to playoffs. You don't need to get to first in the standings. You just need to make sure you get that 6th seed, that 5th seed to just sneak in the playoffs, because once you get to playoffs, it doesn't matter what you did. You just have to win the playoff week. So as always, guys, cheers.